I'm just gonna play a random thing with sound. We'll see if you hear this or not. I don't even know.
Smash into the tube lift! It's a code 11!
Was that
Yep.
coming through for you?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. That's promising. That's like it sucks. This is where like audio snobbishness comes in. It's like it's in mono and it's really compressed. It's just imagine it's like 10 times better, minus 5 times better than you think it is. That's probably about
Right.
how good it is. Yeah, no, that'll do then. It sounds like that'll work. Okay, well, I'm gonna do a stupid thing and change camera again.
It's gonna be sick.
I'm living for the production value of the camera changes. It's so much fun.
It's good because there's actually just no content. It's just going to be camera changes for the next couple hours. So
There you go. Just keep us entertained with your flashy tricks.
You need to do the thing where like, you look into the camera and then you change to the other camera.
yeah, I'll
Like,
start doing some magic tricks in a moment here.
I was gonna say
Perfect.
like not even Twitch streamers have this.
Right?
Yeah.
This is so elaborate.
Okay, so this is maybe getting a little into the content in a way, but for me, one of the main things for me in audio is like trying to make connection with people, because in the end of it all, it's not about gear, even though someone could call me an engineer. It's not even really about music. It's about emotion. It's about connecting with people. So the reason why I go to this elaborate, hijinks here is more so that I can have these proper interactions, and that maybe it's like a little bit closer to what it might be like if you're just hanging out with me in the studio. So that's the philosophy behind it. Getting deep really early.
I like it.
Yeah. This is a lot better, with
It's already
all
paying
mic
off
stuff and
tenfold.
everything. Absolutely.
I'll have to get in touch with your teachers and let them know they've got to up their game.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
I encourage that.
Yeah.
Well, I see here, you said that we can just kind of kick it off. I see Ahmed and Liam B and Josh. Some people, faces I can't see on camera that I haven't heard the voices of, but welcome to all of you here. Jaden, I don't know if you wanted to do, or someone on your team here wanted to do some kind of a kickoff to this, or if I should just dive straight into it. I mean, it's going to be pretty casual, but I don't want to, supersede the president of the game club,
No, not at all. No, I think we're just good to dive right in.
Well, Logan did want to do a kazoo performance.
Is he gonna play music?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, if you'd like to hear my kazoo, it's kind of yeah. I'll play. When's your birthday, David?
It's May 16th.
May 16th. Okay, well, happy really belated birthday.
Oh my god.
The Harry Potter song.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's copyrighted music, though. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah, this is being recorded, Logan. You better be careful now.
Well, anyways, I'll thank you, Logan, for that. And I'll
Of
just
course.
dive into it. I'm basically my hope is that from the time that we have here today, that I can kind of share a little bit of what audio is. And I know we all kind of know what audio is. We listen to audio all the time. Like, we have this understanding of like I'm listening all the time. But I think there's a difference between listening and hearing. And I'm hoping to unpack a little bit of that and go into the details of what you can hear. My hope is actually that not only would you be a little bit inspired in either your game creation or whatever pursuits you have, presentations at school, or maybe eventually you might be doing an advertisement for some kind of software or something that you've developed, and like to think about audio, to think about connecting with your audience. That's kind of the main hope from this. The secondary hope is that maybe somehow through my passion for this subject, that maybe you'll latch onto some of that yourself, and it might even change how you hear things in the environments that you go through throughout your day. Admittedly, we're spending a lot of time at home, but that maybe you would actually hear things differently, and you would listen to things differently because of this talk. It's not going to be super formalized. I have a rough outline. I have examples and things that I'm going to be throwing together here, a little bit impromptu. But yeah, at any point, if you have questions, if you have like a tangent, a direction that you're like, hey, I've always wondered about this, we'll go into that. But you know, you might be saying, well, but who are you? Well, I'm David Fairfield. I was born and raised in Kelowna. I worked for the Walt Disney Company for 10 years. 3 years of that I was full-time in audio, music composition primarily, and then I started to learn sound design and that kind of thing. And that was a few years ago, and now I run my own business full-time. And I work for anything from AAA games to little indie mobile games. And then I also do some stuff with artists and musicians, as well as the occasional advertisement or voiceover gig, just sort of dabbling in a lot of different areas. I think of myself as someone who, though primarily I would say I'm a music composer first and then a sound designer, I also, it's being in audio as a career is a bit of a humble thing, because you kind of have to collect from multiple streams of income, which is not becoming uncommon in the arts as a whole. Rarely does someone actually earn all their money from one particular task. So on the one hand, I'm trying to niche down into the areas that I'm best at, and on the other hand, while I'm developing my business, I'm also kind of thinking, well, I don't know, I tried character acting a month or so ago, and it went horribly. I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's not an area for me. Okay, fine, you know. So yeah, that's like the smallest glint of who I am. Some of the projects that I've worked on that I can talk about, because unfortunately I'm under like NDAs and non-disclosure agreements and can't talk about everything. But some of the stuff that I've worked on, I worked very heavily when I was with Disney. I worked heavily on the Club Penguin product, both the original version and then a mobile first version that they did. I've done Foley and sound design for games, as well as there was an animated short that I did some Foley for. And let's see, these days, what are the projects? I've got 2 for AAA studios that I can't talk about. I work for a studio in town called Hyper Hippo, which I think a lot of you may have actually toured around. So I've worked with that team now for about 1.5 years, and on various titles and little advertisements and things that they do there. And then, I don't know, a month ago or so, I did a motorcycle ad for a company that does apps for social platforms for motorcyclists. Yeah, I don't know, it's a little smattering of things. I've worked with Marvel products, Muppets, let's see, Pirates of the Caribbean, did a video game thing for that, some of Disney's toy lines, like just kind of a smattering of things all over the place. It's a little silly to pause for questions right off the bat, but I'm curious, that's a lot of things I've unloaded here. I'd like, any questions about that? Curiosity.
What's your favorite one that you've done? What's your favorite project that you've worked on?
So the answer I have for that is going to be, the first part is going to be an absolute cop-out. It'll feel that way, at least. And then the second half, I hope, will be a little more satisfying. The seeming cop-out answer is that often it's actually the most recent project I've worked on. I think there's a kind of, like if you're into sports or even video games, you know, when you've like conquered something, like your team won, or you scored the goal, you finished well, there's just a tremendous amount of satisfaction that comes from that. So I think it was last week I was working on a thing that unfortunately it's under NDA, but I'll try and describe it. It was like I was working on a thing where not only was I composing music, but there was also a video and video editing component, which scratches an itch that I have from like a long time ago. And it was just so fun and so satisfying to do something like that. In terms of the actual like product that I most enjoyed working on, I would say it was for Club Penguin Island, was a game that we did, and I wrote like a lot of music for it. I think in total for that game it was maybe like 200, maybe 250 minutes of music that I wrote for it. And because of the amount of music that it wasn't just like, oh, can you write a song and it's like this single entity by itself. It was like I'm writing suites of music around characters and themes and different environments, and there was just a lot more narrative packed into everything we were doing. So just as a project itself, it offered a lot of diversity and depth and range that you know, quicker projects I don't get the liberty to do that kind of a thing. Yeah. Let's see, moving into one of the things just being kind of, why does sound matter? Why should you think about sound and audio? Where does it maybe find a fit for you, either in a video game setting or in some other setting? Like earlier I mentioned, like advertising, or it could be even a part of a product that isn't a video game per se. It might be more like a podcast or something else. The thing is, I think that for whatever reason, we're really good at identifying visual changes. We're used to this screen life, right? Like where, we have a screen, anything can show up on it at any time. And we're kind of used to that construct. A lot of us have experience maybe with Photoshop or video editing. A lot of us have touched these things, even just with your phone, photo apps and things like that. You get a real sense of, I can do such and such, and I'll get this visual result. So we've got a bit of a palette for it. I would say, you can almost say it's like, how a chef can be in a kitchen and they know what to add, they know what to remove, they have a bit of taste, about what it is that they're trying to create. With audio, for some reason it's different, and I've chewed on this for a long time. I haven't been able to crack it, but for some reason, audio, it kind of, well, it's often a word that we use in the kind of audio development is immersion. It's your environment. So right now, this might seem like a little cheesy, but it's maybe you could call it a mindfulness exercise, but really it's just about being present in your environment. So like, just for a moment, it's going to feel awkward for a moment, but just for a moment, maybe pop out one of your earphones or whatever and just take a listen to your environment. And I'll shut up in a second, but listen for what is in the room. What can you hear? Is it your computer fans? Can you hear stuff outside? Is there traffic? Your roommates? What is it that you hear? And also think about the room itself. What does a room of the size that you're in sound like? Because it has a sound to it. So we'll just take a second. It'll be awkward, but I'm going to do it too. So. I know that that's weird. I know that that's something like we don't do stuff like that. And admittedly, whatever room you're in might be a little bit bland. For me, I can hear the sort of HVAC running. I can also hear like a little bit of a hum, high frequency hum from the monitors in the room that I'm in. The computer monitors as they kind of oscillate on and off with power. These sorts of things. Like, you start to notice little details and subtleties. I challenge you, as you go out this week, hopefully you're getting a bit of time outside, go for some walks, get your brain and your body working. Like, take a moment to just completely stop, turn off your podcast or your music, whatever you're listening to. Stop and just listen to the environment and see if you can pick up on, fill a list of at least 6 things. In most environments, you can probably fill a list of 12 things that you can hear, whether it be the rustling of the wind in the trees, whether it be the sound of dirt and grass under your feet, or perhaps it's asphalt on a particular kind of rubber under the sole of your shoe. Maybe you have a little rock trapped in one of the cracks in your shoe and you can hear that click, click, click as you go along. Now, admittedly, you can drive yourself mad starting to notice all of these details. My wife can maybe attest to that. Like, be like, what's that sound in the car? Nope, we've got it. Where is it? Stop it, But sound is all around us. It creates the environment that we're in, and it immerses us in it. And then there are weird experiences we can have where that reality gets broken. I don't know if any of you have experienced this, where you're listening to a piece of music and you hear something in the room that you're in, and you think to yourself, like, is someone coming up behind me? Or something like that. I don't know if you've all experienced this, but like, you hear something and you're like, that sounds like it's in the room. If you go back in the track, you actually hear, that's in the track that I'm in. And what's happened in that moment is that your brain, which has an understanding of, I'm in a room that's about this size with a carpet on the floor and a solid ceiling above and solid walls around with very little furniture or whatever. It sounds a certain way. And for some reason in that track, there was just one of those sounds was mixed, recorded, maybe a reverb was added to it with a very similar fingerprint to the room that you're in, and that's why it just pops you out. All of a sudden you just realize, like, wait a second. It breaks your reality a little bit because you're, creating this false reality with the music, and then it's breaking into your real reality in the room that you're in. That's maybe just to give you a hint, a sense of like how our mind is automatically calculating an amazing amount of information, and we're not really often aware of it. The last thing that I'll mention on that point, and this is just in part, it's me sharing my enthusiasm. Even if you don't care about the details, I want you to just kind of buy into why there's something so special about sound, and that we all kind of intuitively understand but don't cognitively understand. Think about this. If I was to tell you to look at an object, whether it be in the room that you're in, or maybe if you're standing in a field, and I say, look up, what do? Of course, we tilt our head, we move our eyes, like a cannon, move it upwards, and we look up, right? Now, if I were to say to you, listen up, listen, not like listen up as in pay attention, but like listen towards the ceiling, you're not going to turn. Well, you might turn your head, but you're kind of like, what? Wait a second, what is that? And yet, if thunder came right above you, you would know it's above you. Or if it was behind you, 1 kilometer away, you would know it's behind you. How is that possible when you only have 2 microphones in your ears? One on the left, one on the right. How is that possible? It's because your mind is mathematically calculating the ratio of mutedness or non-mutedness, the reverb tail or no reverb tail, to determine distance and location. I mean, I don't know about you. Like, you guys are all muted. I see your faces at least, but it's like, that's crazy. So there's a lot to be excited about with audio. Now, how does that get practical? Like, if you're saying to yourself, okay, that's fine, but I'm not into it. That doesn't interest me as much as it does to you, strange person in blue room, where it gets valuable is that if you're designing a game, an advertisement, a podcast, an experience, you have a way to connect with someone's physical location. In the way that music, you heard something in the song, all of a sudden it connected with your physical location, not on purpose, it just happened. But you have a way to design into your experiences a way to make it more tangible, more, I'll use this word again and again, immersive to the experience that's going on. Here, I see, sorry, this is like the weird thing of like chat stuff. Okay, actually a really amazing part of audio. You can really immerse someone by using the biological tricks. Absolutely. And so, okay, we'll get into like what are some of those tricks. We'll get into like how can you actually leverage this without becoming a full-on music composer or sound designer. How can you leverage these things so that your game experience, your advertisement, whatever it is, makes more of a connection with people. So let's jump into that. Well, actually, maybe I should pause. I'm going to pause at every section just in case I'm rambling on too much. Any questions about that? Anything we want to dwell on before I move on to explaining how audio works to create those, as Gustavo said here, like biological tricks. How does that work? Any questions? It's totally fine if not. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, like, I feel like some of our participants today, like them, or at least me personally, I don't quite know some of the vocabulary and terminologies like reverb or foley. I know what foley is, so maybe you could elaborate on some of the terminologies.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's see. There are so many terms, and I don't want to fire hose you with information that's not helpful for the moment, but so just because I did dwell on it quite a bit, reverb is the sound of a room. So if mute yourself. If you just do a loud clap in your room, unless you're embarrassed to do these things, just give it a loud clap and listen back to what happens after the clap, because you probably have an idea, like, what does skin on skin sound like? It's very quick, it's very brief, and yet the room is actually most of what you're hearing. Give it another go. So reverb is going to be, of course, like, you know, like how well, okay, think of it like this. You know waves in a pool? You drop a pebble in a still pond and you watch those waves travel across, and then you see them interact with the shoreline, maybe with other waves that are coming towards them and so on. And you see how it kind of like takes that pristine bubble of energy that's essentially rolling across the top of the water, and it refracts it, and it pushes it in different directions. That's what reverb is. So when you're in a small room, reverb tail is very short. You know, it's maybe sub 1 second. Like, it's very, very short. When you're in a long room, you know, the kind of cathedral that we imagine choirs and all this stuff in, or maybe an arena, an auditorium, that is going to have a long reverb because it's a lot of hard surfaces, you know, if there aren't bodies with jackets and stuff in there, or dead bodies, I guess, with jackets on, whatever it is. You know, the think of that wave of water going out through the environment and then hitting everything and coming crosswise against itself, coming back towards you as the listener. That is the reverb. So when you say that you were in a cathedral sort of environment, it's all made out of stone. The ceilings are 50 to 100 feet high. So if you did that same clap, the sound, you know, imagine those waves going up, it's gonna hit the stone hard walls of the cathedral and start coming back towards you and overlapping itself before it comes back to you. That's what reverb is like. When you know, when it's a very flat surface, that's when you can get things like delay, and that's where it's like there's a lot of clarity to the sound. So your clap would be like clap, you know, like the kind of, I mean, we all kind of know what delay is. I won't bore you with that, but
Like an echo, right? Sorry.
yeah, an echo, delay or echo, those are basically the same thing. You know, yeah, basically the same thing. Yeah, I think, did that answer your question? I feel like maybe there were other terms that I should mention.
Is it okay if I quickly explain something as well?
Jump in, feel free.
Yeah, for those that are in UBCO right now, when you go to the commons and you're hearing someone below you when you're upstairs and you hear this echo kind of situation, that's a reverb.
Yeah. That's a great example. And, you know, it's interesting when you're in these environments, you walk around and then say to yourself, like, I'm having a hard time hearing someone. That's because you can imagine those waves of water getting completely blurred and choppy around you. And so then it's actually hard to hear a direct sound source with all of this cacophony of sound going on. Like, I wish, you know, there probably is a way to visualize this, but really just think of like light or water bouncing off of every surface, and then people keep talking, so there's more source that's bouncing around all over the place. Anyways, I can get way too excited about these things. Definitely stop me if there are other terms that come up. Maybe pop them in the chat here. Can't study in the commons. I'm guessing that's a really, really hard surface kind of space.
It's like it's a big room.
Yeah.
A big open room. And
Yeah.
there's like a big open floor on the bottom where a bunch of people are. And there's a little area up top. And so I guess if you're up top, I think that's what Megan's referring to.
Interestingly enough, like, if any of you are either in engineering, architectural engineering or anything like that, sound is such an important part of how people enjoy or don't enjoy a space. Because say that you made a grand area that was meant for, I don't know, dinner parties. Some ritzy firm has hired you to design this space, right? And you just make it look beautiful. That's a lot of glass, a lot of metal and concrete. It's so modern and slick, you know? But all of those surfaces are like hard, which means that if the goal is to have people feel comfortable in a hospitable environment, then that's going to be really noisy. It's going to be really loud. Everybody's going to be shouting, but they're trying to be polite. You know, how can you do that if you're like shouting, but you're trying to be discreet or polite or whatever? It's a hot mess. And the same with like Starbucks. You know, I was just hanging out with a friend last night, and it was just us two in this Starbucks. And for whatever reason, the music was almost a dominant part of the conversation. Like, if it was a person talking to me, I would almost know as much about what the lyricist is saying to me as I was my friend sitting across the table. It's like, that's not actually hospitable. That, in fact, even though people wouldn't probably put their finger on it, that creates this grating sensation that makes them feel like, I don't really want to be here for a long time. Let's see, question here. Are there any interesting use for drive, gain, or changing pitch in this topic? Well, I feel like we can get into that a little bit. That's getting a little bit more into the technical area. Maybe just for the sake of terms, I'll mention that drive, gain, those can often be used for creating a sort of distortion or to boost the volume level of something. Changing pitch, we'll get into pitch, and actually that's a good transition. We'll use that. We'll use that as a transition here. So I'm going to start to explain a little bit about how people in audio categorize audio. And the goal in doing this is not to convey, here are a bunch of terms and categories, but instead so that when you go away and you're either working on a game or you're going away and you're thinking about the environment that you're standing in, how can you start to go through a list in your mind and say, what am I hearing in these categories, and start to be more mindful and thoughtful of these things. So because we've actually been talking a lot about sound effects and that kind of thing, I'm going to start with that. So sound effects, to me at least, sound effects equal immersion. I've kind of already said that. But in audio circles, we have a few different ways that we break down the kinds of sounds that we use in an environment. I feel like, almost like one of those exercises, when the teacher's like, this is getting boring, why don't you stand up and do some exercise? I'm going to move over to the computer, and I'm going to play you some audio samples so that we can just get a real tactile feeling for this. Okay, moving over. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I've got my sort of sound design library. I'm assuming you guys can hear me all right. You give me a thumbs up if you're, yeah, we're good. All right, great. So sound design. There are a bunch of people called field recordists. They go around and they do a whole bunch of recording in environments with special microphones, or even with their cell phones. Like, really, you just go out, capture the sound, and then sound designers like me will take that and manipulate it and edit it and turn it into something else. And in fact, some of what was said here about pitch and drive and like using effects to make something new. So I'm gonna play some stuff. I've got my ambience folder. Let's just see. Unfortunately I haven't prepared these in advance, so we'll see what this kind of comes out as. You guys are hearing that?
Yeah, we're hearing it.
So that's from a ferry bus ride in Rio. So that's what we would call in the audio field, we would call that an ambience, which is to say when you as the character, the main actor in the story, move into a space, what does that space sound like? Let's just see what other, I'm just going to click randomly here and let's find out what this is. That one's subtle, and it sucks it's in mono, it's getting compressed to all crap, but that's the sound of the Flatwoods, Pine Castle Forest, I guess. Whispering winds. I really wish you guys had high fidelity experiences right now, but you don't, so we're going to stop that one. Let's see. Something else here. Where can we teleport ourselves to? Some kind of a windstorm. I wish this was in stereo. Oh, I'm going to stop whinging. The wind buffeting, the sound of rain sounds like pavement maybe. Maybe there are leaves on the pavement. I'm kind of trying to show you this, like, using your ears as if you were using your eyes. So, like, if you were sitting in someone's living room, the conversation is kind of dragging on, maybe like this one right now, and you just your mind starts to wander, but your eyes also start to wander, right? And you notice, okay, there's a coffee cup on the table, and there's a little ring around where the coffee cup is. It seems this is your grandma's house, I guess. It seems, she doesn't put, a little saucer under there, and so over time this stain is developed, but she always seems to put it in the same spot. Interesting. You see how your visual acumen, you're focusing on something, you're starting to identify details, either that or you don't, and you just can't wait to get back to your screen. I don't know. But you start to notice details in the same way as you're in an environment. try to focus your ear as if it was like Lord of the Rings fans, like the Eye of Sauron or whatever, like just focusing around the environment, you know? Okay, let's see. So that's ambiences. What other things do we have? The word fully was something that I brought up earlier. That's going to be things, basically, it has to do with the main character's body. So what do their clothing sound like? The rustling of their clothing. What does, them touching an object like a coffee cup or whatever. Now that they've interacted with it, it's become a fully moment. Their footsteps would be a common sort of thing. Let's see here. What do we have? Oh, that's just one. Let's find a sequence if we can. Scuffs and scrapes. Here we go. Walking along the concrete. I don't know how well that comes through, but it's everything that the person is touching. And there is a sort of narrative there. Like the sound effect that we just heard was probably of something like a leather shoe. It has a hard sole to it. So there's a story about the person in that moment. We know that, well, probably they're not a skater, like probably they're not, riding on a dirt bike when they come into work. It's like there's a narrative that's unfolding, even if you haven't had a visual on screen. Likewise, we're actually hearing something about their environment, what they're affecting. It's like, let's play that again. Like it almost sounds like concrete, but concrete that's got a bit of dirt to it. So more likely than not, if it was inside an internal environment, I don't hear any reverb, so it's probably outdoors. This is getting very Sherlock Holmes all of a sudden, right? Like we know this person is probably male because of the weight that we're hearing, probably wearing leather shoes or some kind of equivalent, probably outdoors because we're not hearing a reverb. And, suddenly all this information is being communicated. And even though you've maybe never thought about these things before, your brain kind of automatically calculates those things and dismisses it so quickly because, well, of course, it's just a person with hard shoes on a concrete dirt floor. I just get so excited about this stuff. All right. Okay. So we've covered ambiences. We've covered Foley being anything that you touch or interact with. And then we get into sound design, and I have to be careful about what I share because of NDAs and all that fun stuff. Ooh, I know what I could do. Okay, let's see if I can find this project here. So while I'm finding this thing, there are occasions where I am, for me to get work. When it's a small project, often it's just been recommended to me, like, hey, we heard you do this thing. Can you do this thing? I say yes, and they're like, okay, great. For bigger projects, it's more of, can you show us that you are a good fit for this project? And for this one, I've been working for this company now for 5 months, maybe. And it took me 16 hours to do a sound design test, and I didn't get paid a penny for it. So let's see here. I'm going to pull this up. And I'm going to try something fancy here. I'm going to move you guys here. You'll see yourselves. And then... okay, let's see if I can make this work. So I'm going to play you a video. So this was a thing where I was sound designing for this thing. You should now see my screen. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. So this is sound design. I mean, some of it includes ambience, some of it includes Foley, but the idea behind sound design is that you're not typically trying to create something that is in fact real. You're trying to create something that is hyper real, or like often the goal is let's root it in reality because we want people to buy it. We want them to believe it. We want them to emotionally engage with it, but make it sweeten it, like an Instagram filter, turn up the contrast, put a blue layer on top of it. Okay, anyways, you'll maybe recognize this game. So this is just a test that I was doing, and the main focus was on the main character and a little bit of the peripheral stuff. Enough rambling, playing the video. So, I mean, that gives you a little bit of an idea. I don't know how well that came through. I'm going to constantly remind myself to stop whinging about that, but there you go. So, you know, that's sound design. In this case, yes, there are practical things that are going on, where of course, you know, Mario, as he's walking around or he's on that little bird thing, the bird thing is touching the ground, there's footsteps involved, there's, you know, he flings his hat. Like, yes, you could say, oh well, he's wearing clothes, so, you know, I'm gonna make it sound like his clothes are moving. But, you know, if you just try to throw something, you don't actually make a lot of noise unless you have like one of those, like, what is it, polyester windbreakers or something like that. You know, otherwise, what we use, just as small examples, like if you're gonna do a cartoon thing, and you're gonna throw something, then you're gonna have what's, you know, like a whoosh is the term we would use, what we would look up in the sound library. And whooshes are often like a stick, a pole, a piece of bamboo, something like that, that's moved through the air, and that's where you get that like kind of sound, that quick, you know, airy sort of movement sound. That's, you know, not really designing sound per se, but it is a hyper reality. It's you know, you don't hear that when a baseball player is pitching. You hear the crack of the bat, you hear the crowd, you know, you hear those things, but you don't hear the pitcher's like so much, you know. He's not going that fast despite how fast the ball's going. Yeah, so that, I feel like that maybe gives you a little bit of a sense of like, these are the main terms. We have ambiances, we have Foley, and we have sound design. And in the case, probably the best example of sound design in that video was that you have this big box thing. They've got some kind of a Chinese Japanese theme, like it's kind of made out of wood and bamboo. I don't know what the narrative is of that game. I haven't actually played that game myself yet. But, you know, they've got that going on. So it's like, okay, how do I make something that is 200 feet tall, that lands on the ground? Like, I've never, you and I have never been likely around anything that's been that big, that's landed on the ground. What does that sound like? Well, okay, we're gonna have a low end bump, you know, this big sub kind of boom, but then there's also the dirt flying off of their feet and landing around them, and debris and stuff. And even if visually some of this stuff isn't on screen, I'm enhancing the narrative and extending what's going on through those sounds. You know, when he runs into the fence, you know, there's he's hitting this electrified, you know, force field kind of fence. It's like, well, what does one of those sound? I don't know. What does that sound like? And in this case, the sample that I was using and manipulating to create that sound is actually the sound of basically a long spring, almost like a slinky that's just been stretched out enormously, and it's getting struck by some kind of an object, maybe like a drumstick or something like that. And the physics, you know, the kind of energy flows down this coil, and it lets off a little bit of heat that's imperceptible, and then all this sound that, if you have the right microphones, is picked up by it. It's like, that's a very unique sound. That's a very otherly sound. Most people have probably never heard that in their reality before, but that's like one of these things that can be this hyper reality to create the sound of hitting this force field fence and so on and so forth. And then cascading that sound into an ambience, a reverb. You know, what does you know, I'll kind of pull up the video again, maybe. Da, 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 da. Sorry, I'm navigating all these screens here. If we kind of fast forward to that, you can see the environment. We've got Big Beastie here. We've got this electrified fence thing going on. And then this is actually a sand, sort of almost like a, what would you call that? One of those gardens where they would rake it and stuff like that. So you've got a sand surface down there. And then as we look out into the background, I'm kind of trying to find, there's fireworks going off, interestingly enough. I didn't actually cover that in the sound design at all. In a proper game, it would be covered, but just for the demo, I was doing everything manually. But you can see here, there's like a lot of clouds and stuff like that down on the bottom right. And like, it's really just like nothingness. It's openness. Well, if I was being quite realistic about that, it would be probably no reverb at all, right? Because there's nothing to physically refract off of except for the sand, and the sand would probably be a dampening effect. But because we as people are used to hearing big open spaces in the context of an arena, a cathedral, or whatever, I just have a really long-tailed reverb on everything that's a big moment. And the reason why it's only on the big moments and not the small moments is because the big sounds excite the environment more. So they get more reverb. That's going to make them feel bigger, not only volume-wise bigger, even though they might not be volume-wise bigger, but it'll just make them feel vast, you know? So, okay. I have nattered on that one long enough. Let's do another camera change. I mean, how exciting is this?
I'm excited already.
Here, if anybody has questions about sound design, we can go into that while I'm tweaking things around here.
I mean, I'm kind of curious how. So I really like how you call it like everybody has like their own reality, and it's like how do they perceive that in their reality?
Yeah.
When you're crafting like a reality for a game environment, how do you? So I mean, like that was like a sound clip that you manually did all the sounds for after watching it, right?
Yeah.
When you're making a game, how do you integrate all of these concepts into the actual environment, assuming like we're talking about like a 3D game?
Yeah. That's a great question. Okay, perfect time for transitioning. I'm not going to hear you for a second while I unplug my headphones. Analog, what a dweeb, you know. How great is that? All right. So there's when it comes to video games specifically, there are a couple phases, I would say, to each project. And maybe in answering this question, I'm going to try to give you a bit of a construct for how you can approach sound for your project. Now, I admit that a lot of this already, you might be like, that's amazing. I have no idea how I'm going to start doing that, like with where I'm at. So I'm going to try and like apply it to maybe what would be like a 101, or the beginner's kind of level. But I'm also going to try to vision cast a little bit for you so that you're like, I'm totally bought into audio is a good thing. I think it'll help me engage more with my audience. How can I get good at it? How can I find someone who can do it for me? That kind of a thing. Okay, so in terms of phases to maybe where do you go from we have a game to now we have sound design, so now we have sound design in the game and that kind of thing. So first, you know, when I'm approached by a client and I'm like, okay, we're going to start a project, first I'm asking a lot of emotion questions, a lot of goal-oriented questions. Like for this clip as an example, I was making up narrative for myself. I was saying, okay, this is this big environment. I'm going to use a reverb to like make it even bigger and huger and that kind of thing because I want the player to feel small, a bit maybe afraid, you know, a bit like this is daunting because it's the big boss moment, right? So you should feel a little like panicky, almost like get a little adrenaline going, like get some endorphins going, like get that kind of thing, get your heart pumping, you know.
I was scared watching that clip for sure. I could feel it.
Yeah.
When the boss turned around, I was like, oh man, you better get out of the way or this is gonna go south.
Suck. It's gonna be the worst. And you know, you're just kind of trying to say like, okay, what do we want the audience to feel? That's a question that I ask primarily when it comes to music, but in this case it was all sound design. So like, what do I want the audience to feel? How can I get them to feel that way through my intentional decisions? Now that then acts as what's called a decision matrix. You can imagine just like you know, maybe grade 3 or something, you're doing multiplication and they might have taught you like draw the 1 2 3 4 5 across the top, 1 2 3 4 5, and then fill in all the squares. This is how it all works. I don't know if they teach math like that still, but you know, that's a decision matrix, a lookup table for you to just say, okay, here's the answer to that question. So by asking questions early in your project, what do we want the audience to feel? You know, knowing that can act as a guideline for what you're going to try and do next. So once you've hit that high level thing, you know your overall concept, which you're trying to achieve, then I go into the actual sound designing. So in video games, the ideal situation, in actually almost every medium, for sound design in particular, it's best to be doing things in sync, which is to say, the animators have finished what they're doing. The game designers have kind of constructed and created the flow of things. We know what the big bad guy looks like. We know what the mechanics are. We understand how things are going to work, because we have to base this as much in reality as possible, even though we're creating a hyper reality. All of that information is important. Also, if you're designing a whole scene and then everything about that scene changes, what a waste of not only time and money, of course, but of energy, of creative energy, of emotional energy. You know, we all know what it's like to work hard on something and then find out it wasn't worth it in the end. It wasn't the finished product we were looking for, and it's very deflating. So once we have sync, I might be delivered something like a video like that, and then I bring it into a DAW, digital audio workstation, and then I start creating the sounds. So at that point, the sounds are created, and then it gets to, and this is actually, you know, Jaden's question, what happens next? Well, then it's what we would call implementation. So implementation is when you're saying, when should this programmatically trigger or not trigger? Start the audio, then stop it. Or, you know, does it play from this location or that location? That kind of a thing. And there are a couple ways to go about implementation. One is what I would call the throw it over the fence method. And that would be where a team has sound designers and they just get an asset list where it's like, here are all the things that we want. And then you just throw it over to a developer and hope that it's kind of implemented properly. Can that work? Absolutely. Is it ideal? Not in my experience. Usually what you want is, because the technical informs the creative, it's valuable to know both or have control over both. So that, as an example, this will be a music example, but it could apply to sound design as well. Say that you have a character in a third-person shooter game or something like that, but it's a story-driven shooter game. They're approaching a spot that's of importance. Maybe this is Halo or something like that. They're approaching a spot of importance. At any point in the game, they could be like approaching it and they're supposed to feel like maybe a bit of anticipation. Maybe the birds that were singing in the forest stop because it's actually a scary environment. No birds or living things are there. But then the person says to themselves, I'm going to turn around. I forgot. I should get some more health here because I'm anticipating the danger. I need to go. There was a med kit back there. I'm going back there. You know. Then you have to know from an implementation perspective. Okay, what are we going to do if the person turns around? How do we de-escalate this? In which case, you would never, in that case, trigger a sequence where all of a sudden this like scary, I don't know, scary anticipatory sound that escalates and builds to a climax. You wouldn't trigger that knowing that at any point the character could turn around and go away. Instead, if you knew, okay, there's actually a cutscene here and the player is locked into this environment, then you can feel a lot of freedom to build a hugely excited moment because you don't have to turn around and de-escalate it. But if you knew that no such moment existed because the game designers are like, we've loaded everything into the game's console or into the console, there is no loading screen, there is no cutover moment, there is no cinematic or anything like that, then you have to know, okay, how are we going to escalate this and at a moment's notice know how to de-escalate it in a way that doesn't feel clunky. You know, it doesn't feel like somebody just put the pause bar on whatever was playing, you know? Yeah. So when it comes to implementation, there are a couple ways to approach it from a technical perspective. I know that you guys have been working a lot in Unity and doing stuff in that. With Unity, the default audio plugins, if you're creating a rich, immersive environment, default audio plugins, not that great. You can get around that if you're a programmer and you're quite knowledgeable in such things and you go through the YouTube videos and you start creating stuff through that. But often game designers will use audio middleware, which is basically to say, Unity hasn't developed a ton of awesome tools, but these other companies have. They work seamlessly with Unity to present your audio experience. The sort of two biggies that you might have heard of are Fmod and WWise. These are the ones that are going to be used on your like huge games. It might be used in indie projects as well because they have a pay structure that allows for that, where you're like, if you don't think your game's going to earn much, you only pay us a little bit of money. Once you hit your first $1 million or whatever, then you pay us a lot of money, you know. But then there's also kind of the neglected little brother the third option is a program called Fabric by Tasman Audio. I'll see if I'll just pop this in here. Tasman Audio Fabric. That's there for you to maybe mess around with if you take an intense interest in this. And then the other ones here, we've got WWise and Fmod. I think I'm struggling on this right now. I think that Fmod might be PC only. Either that or it's WWise. I can't quite remember. One of them is cross-platform, so depending on whether you're Mac or PC, that might be applicable. Let's see here. Well, Jaden, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, and I feel like it almost opens up more questions too. About,
Sure.
like, there's just like so many. I feel like, especially because like what you brought up about games, if it's not a cinematic, then it becomes so much harder to make those like fluid transitions.
Yes.
Is there like blending technology? Because like it's the same
Yes.
kind of problem with animations, right? It's kind of like you have two keyframes. How do you blend nicely between all these crazy things players are doing?
Yeah.
With sound, I feel like it's the same thing. How do you smoothly transition or blend between
Totally. Okay, just a second. I'm going to take my headphones off for a moment and grab my notepad.
Sure.
Feel like this is one of those things where it's just a little bit better visually said. So, you can imagine for yourself that you have the main character. I don't know why I'm showing you this, but that's a top-down view of the main character. How about that? They would have kind of built in, and this is where obviously the program is doing all of this sort of for us. They would have a sort of a listening range of sorts, as you can imagine. Like this is what they can hear. And then when it comes to things like, say that we do have, you're playing Halo, you're in some kind of strange jungle environment. You're going to have different objects around that environment, like some kind of a tree. Maybe it has significance, maybe it doesn't. But they want you to feel quite immersed in the environment and sensing like there are birds of some alien sort. There are, the version of an alien orangutan, in which case those would be kind of these dots around the environment. And you can imagine that, like, if it's kind of in your circle, then you're going to hear that thing. So programmatically, it would be a huge waste if all of the sounds in the environment are triggering and playing at all time. There are thousands of them. And it's rendering that audio, but it's muted. The volume fader is all the way down on it. So instead, what it does is kind of voice limiting, where it says, where does this fall in the priority of what is being heard? Then as a sort of trump card to that, you can create this sort of emitter size around an object. Say that you are approaching something quite large, like a volcano. We want to use that to make the player feel that ominous sort of thing. That's going to have a huge emitter on it that will, get into your kind of environment. And automatically it's calculating, like, you can imagine that if this is I don't know if it's reversed on your screen. If it's like the right ear, the left ear, it's going to be automatically saying the player's left ear is closest to the volcano. So we're going to pump that through their headphones, through their 5.1, 7.1 audio system, whatever it is. We're going to simulate that and make that sort of decision. Now they've turned around or they've changed different direction. Now it's going to be heard elsewhere. And kind of getting back to the thunder example that I gave earlier, the program as well as your speakers are being used to try and trick your brain to say, yes, it's left and right, but it can also do things to trick you and say, it's above you, it's behind you at a kilometer. Those kinds of things can be programmed into it. And to some success or not success, this is actually a hurdle for virtual reality, because everybody's ears are of a different size. Their brains are calculating based on the specifications of those ears. As in, if you have big, thick ears, how something sounds behind you and to the right is going to be different than someone who has small and thin ears. It's just going to sound different to them. So when you're in VR, if you're calibrated to the person with thin ears, thin small ears, then it's going to be like, okay, well that's going to sound a little funny. It might shear their reality a little bit. Sorry, I'm just muting my phone here. Yeah, so there are little technical challenges in there, but on the whole, if you're in a pair of stereo headphones, you're playing a video game that's in front of you, you're not in VR, we buy it. We believe that it's real and that it's happening. It might not be fully immersive, but it gets pretty close. And you can imagine, you know, playing this stuff through in mono and stuff like that. That's the furthest thing from something that's a real human experience as possible, really. It's like for us, if we see a picture and it's completely in black and white, that's as far from reality as possible for visual stuff in a way. It doesn't matter what the content is, you put it in black and white, unless you've had a black and white, that's what your eyes represent all the time for you. You're just going to say, well, no, it's not real, this is a fiction. Same thing for mono. You're like, I hear everything around me at different volumes depending where it is and what's, you know, reverb is happening in the room. Anyways, yeah. Moving on to the next thing, unless there's other questions there. Actually, I don't want to blow past that if there are other questions there. Nope.
I think there was a little question in chat from.
Okay, here. Once I heard about a game that had always new music, and it used riffs or melodies and music. You know, Gustavo, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I don't know if I am. Your questions have been like the perfect transition, because that's actually that's great into music stuff. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about music. I'll get to Gustavo's question in a moment. But let's establish a foundation first about what music is, how it's used to connect with people, and how it's used to create emotion for people. Let's see. I feel like maybe it's time for another camera change. I have some examples that maybe I can use here. Okay. Plugged back in. Okay. So let's talk about music. So music can be broken down into three specific parts: melody, harmony, and rhythm. Melody, I don't even have to bring it up. This melody is about memory. So if I say to you, Mario theme, da 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 da, like we've all got that in our head, right? It's there. It's tied to, maybe you have memories of playing the game, maybe you don't, maybe it's a retro thing to you, like, but we've all probably got that in our head, and it's because of that melody. And inherently because of that style of music, 8-bit music, where often they weren't able to create more than one voice at a time. Voice being, they couldn't trigger more than one sound at a time, so you couldn't do chords oftentimes, in the early days, that is. And so that naturally lends itself to being something that's very melodic. Let's see here. I'm going to try this. Let's see if we've got... This is where we find out if this will work or not. So, let's see. I'm not getting any sound. Oh, I know why. Okay, that should be coming through, I believe. Is that right? Oh.
Loud and clear.
Great. Okay, so just to make it so that we're not getting needlessly technical or anything like that, what is melody? Usually that's kind of, it's a top line. It's the thing that you sing in the songs that you listen to on the radio. I feel like this will be, maybe this example doesn't work, but... Like, do you recognize that? Okay.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of okay.
Could you not really?
You know, that's the melody. That's the thing that you remember from a song. Harmony is chords. So, you know, that's C major, the most humble and beautiful of chords. You know, this is C minor. Harmony is about emotion. So when it comes to kind of emotion, it's okay. Think of it like this: if melody is about memory, it's your brain. If harmony is about emotion, it's your heart. You know, if we can talk abstract like that. And so there's a difference between you know, this emotion and this emotion. You know, it's like woo, da da da. You know, but it's almost a little cheesy in a way because we're so used to hearing like, oh, that's a minor chord. You're trying to make me sad or something like that. Well, what if we do something that's like, okay, what about something that's magical? Ooh. You know, like interestingly enough, suddenly there's a different story that's being told there rather than just that's pleasant and happy, but suddenly there's something a little more to it. You know, or you do something like this, you go from wait, let's see if this will work. We go to C major, suddenly we go to you know, like now some of this example pretty cheesy, but you kind of get the point. You instantly from these harmonies, these chords, it's evoking an emotion. And then you've got rhythm. Rhythm, you know, sort of rhythm is fight or flight. It's, you know, we all know the kind of the pounding kick of an EDM song or something like that. It's like if you like dancing, if you're good at it, probably, you know, it's you start to feel like you want to dance, right? If you're hearing these big percussive drums in some cinematic thing in a battle sequence, you're going to start to feel like, even if you didn't grow up around a tribe of people who played drums and like how that's a part of your heritage, like you might start to just feel a bit almost anxious or maybe empowered. Like you're going to start to feel this kind of like almost animalistic thing. It's about your body. It's about making you run away or come close. It's about making you dance or feel comfortable, you know? So we've got, kind of recapping, we have melody being your memory, like the Mario theme song. We have harmony being emotion, you know, your major, your minor, your like mystery, you know, or magical thing. And then you have rhythm being this kind of like maybe animalistic, it's your body, it's fight or flight kind of a thing. Now, all of these things come in concert together, in harmony together, you know, in unity together. So when I'm doing something like this, I am doing harmony and melody and rhythm at the same time. And it's a relaxed rhythm. It's a mysterious harmony, you know, and it's something that you might remember because now I've played it like 4 times, you know, and it's starting to become repetitive or recognizable, you know. Let's see here.
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
No,
but
go for it.
The tune that you just played just now, I think Ahmed in chat has a question. Is that combining major and minor chords?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is getting into the musical weeds a little bit. So I'll tell a little story. Time for a camera change. All right. I think by now you guys are probably sick of it, but the novelty hasn't worn off for me, so there you go.
Fun.
So, okay, this is a little bit of story from me, a story from my history with music. Maybe if some of you are aspiring to be a musician or a composer, if that's something that you want to do more of, maybe get paid for it, this is for you. So I'd been working for Disney for a number of years, and I'd always had music as a thing kind of in the background, but I wrote these songs that were like, they weren't a band song. Like at the time, it was like people were playing in rock bands. That was their thing. And though I was a drummer and did some of that, I wrote these songs that weren't songs you would play on a stage. They were kind of misfits. And I thought, like, well, what is this? Where does this go? How does this work? And then I was working at Disney, and I met the composer there. His name's Chris Hendricks. Wonderful guy, amazingly talented guy. And we got to talk, and I realized, like, wait, you're writing this kind of music that's interesting, different. It wouldn't be played from a stage per se, you know, but it's this thing. And so I realized like maybe there's a fit for me in video games. Well, it kind of years went by, and eventually I started like showing the people on the audio team like, I'm interested in this. I have some skills in it. Here, let me show you. This is what I can do in it. Can I get a chance? Can I, you know, do something? So eventually I got an opportunity to write music for a game, and I was like terrified because suddenly it wasn't just good enough to write whatever music I wanted, felt inspired to create. Instead, it was, can you write something specific? I think if I remember correctly, this particular case was a medieval song. And I was terrified because I was like, well, but what is a medieval song? How do I evoke that emotion? What does that look like, you know? And that's when I realized that there's, every song has a certain fingerprint to it. Something that it awakens our pop sensibilities, and I mean popular culture sensibilities. It says to us, this is medieval. So as an example, this isn't a music theory thing, it's just a production and instrument choice thing. If I play you a harpsichord in a certain way, you'll say medieval. Interestingly enough, as I'm aware of it, for much of what would have been the Middle Ages, the harpsichord did not exist at all. It is not a medieval instrument, but in pop culture, we hear it all the time. Composers have been using it for years. It works. We think of it, okay, that's medieval. It's this instrument. So getting a little bit into the question here, you know, combining major and minor, I started to realize that just by knowing major key versus minor key was not good enough. You know, all from a lot of more of like, if you're writing music for a band situation, often major and minor is the approach for it. I'm gonna do another change. So often that is the approach, is like, okay, we're gonna write a song, it's a pop song, it's gonna be in major minor, it's either a happy or sad song, that's the deal. If we're in the major key, this is gonna get a little theory based. That's C major, you know, the humble scale of C major, very happy, especially with the piano up high like this. You know, if I was doing the minor, very minor. But what I did there, when I did this little riff, that's in what's called the Lydian mode. And what modes are like amazing. Modes are basically, how do we get to a subtle emotion, not a kind of hit them over the head with major or minor kind of emotion. So modes, the rules around modes, in this case, I'll do the C major scale, happy, Lydian. Suddenly we're getting into this territory where it has that mystery, and it's all because of this note here. It's an F sharp. Suddenly it evokes a different emotion. So in direct answer to the question, this isn't combining major and minor. It's actually just in the Lydian mode. But it's sometimes a really wonderful thing to move in and out of major, minor, Lydian, not Lydian. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up, but let's see if we can. And there's a lot of delay on this side, so I'm a little choppy. That's major. Suddenly, that's Mixolydian. Then we can add it. We can make it bluesy. And these are all just little alterations to what's fundamentally still the C major scale, but I'm moving in and out of modes. And suddenly you have a lot more to play with. So for you that are musical, that was interesting. For those that aren't, that was boring. So any other questions about that? We've kind of explained a little, you know, this is what music is. This is a bit of how it's used. But it's a vast topic. Hit me with your questions here.
When it comes to composition, something like I found, like I've been playing piano for a long time, but I never really did theory. Like I did theory when I was a kid, but I just like I always just played from sheet music, and like I've done a lot of writing sheet music as well,
Mhm.
but like I don't have really any knowledge beyond like what are the different scales and stuff. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
really minimal. How much do you think theory ties into composition, especially for like when you're trying to craft emotions for games?
Oh man. Okay, that's an interesting topic. So something that is kind of like it's embarrassing to me, it's empowering in one way as well, is that I'm very garbage at music theory. There's something about the way my brain works. It's very difficult for me to learn it. It's also extremely difficult for me to retain it. And so I'm very simplistic. Interestingly enough, Hans Zimmer writes most of his song in D, doesn't know music theory very well. And yet he's a full-on composer. So, you know, if we were to say to ourselves, can you be a very successful composer and not know music theory? He'd be an example of that. Maybe I'd be an example of that. I am making my living out of doing this stuff in audio, and I'm not very good at these things. I think, okay, you guys are at university, a very valuable opportunity for anyone who wants to take advantage of it. But you'll learn, you know, that knowledge and education and all of those things are as valuable as the application of it. So, you know, say that you go to, you have to do a mathematics course for something, a prerequisite for something else. The application is, I need math to get into this course to do things that have nothing to do with math. Okay, well, that's the application. Perfect. In which case, quite naturally, you have either said out loud or your brain has said for you, the second the test is done, I'm dumping this, you know? And we all know what that's like. The second it's done, I'm dumping this, that's it, I'm moving on. Its usefulness has met its end. But if you were going into an engineering degree, math is incredibly valuable. But certain types of math may not be valuable, in which case your mind says, I'm dumping this. Some people have brains that are amazing and they retain everything, and that's a beautiful gift. But most people don't. So you're just going to dump stuff. So in terms of, you know, music theory, becoming a composer, is that necessary or not? I think, is it valuable? Absolutely. So I find, since this is an area that I'm deficient in, I will often tool up for a specific project because I gave that example of where I was like, I have to write a medieval song. How do I do that? Some of the solution I listed was an instrument, not music theory. But, you know, I could also equally say a rhythmic technique that might be used with a harpsichord would be like a, you know, like a kind of lilting, you know, this bouncy kind of a thing might be used. Actually, oh man, I need to try and find an example of that while I keep on nattering on. So, I mean, you get the drift. Basically, I would end up thinking that, is music theory necessary? No. Is it a valuable tool? Absolutely it is. It's all about the application, though. So if you know how to write a fugue, which is, you know, very classical and all that kind of stuff, that's awesome. Where are you going to get paid for that? Maybe it's not as useful, but maybe because you know how to write a fugue, you can introduce that to modern techniques, or you can write for advertisements that are trying to be a bit tongue-in-cheek. You know, there's an application for that. Great. Then that knowledge is useful for you. Yeah. Any other questions on that while I dig up some musical examples here? That's fine. I can live with the silence. I don't.
Yeah, and feel free to unmute yourselves, guys, if you have any questions. You don't have to type it in chat.
Oh, I just saw here from Wikipedia, the modern Lydian mode is a 7-tone musical scale formed from the rising pattern of pitching comprising 3 whole tones. Yes. Okay, it is getting into the music theory side of it, but the very end of that is the sort of formula. This is where, you know, for me, I'm a huge research person. So there is a formula to things. So when I say to myself, okay, well, I want to compose something that's bluesy, there are blues scales. And that's where this kind of tone, whole tone, half tone, semitone, like those kinds of words come in, and they're basically just a pattern saying, like, here's the pattern to that scale or that mode, go ahead and use it. So you know, a 5-tone scale sounds very kind of Asian. You know, we're used to notes scales that are usually 7 notes in the repeating octave at the top, the 8 notes. But you can basically compose anything just using the black notes. I'm just making that up. It's not brilliant or anything, but it instantly sounds a certain genre, right? It sounds a certain emotion. It fits in a certain game or a certain thing somewhere. I feel like some examples here might be fun, just to give you a sense of stuff. So we're at 6:30. We've got a half an hour left. We are kind of coming near the end of the regularly scheduled program. So if you have kind of any questions, any rabbit hole things you want to go into, this will be the time for it. But I think this is the right. Okay, I think this is the right example, and I don't know how well it's gonna come across, but we'll see. Switching cameras. You should be able to see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I've got to move you guys out of there. There you go. Oh gosh. Okay. So this is an example from Club Penguin Island, and this is back to why I enjoyed this project so much. Where else are you told, okay, we're going to have a game environment where it's a medieval theme and you're going to be battling against slime monsters? So this is that scene. So So, yeah, so that's actually, you know, in a way that's a nice spot to land in terms of, it may not be the genre of game or whatever it is that you're creating, but, you know, that is the full package deal of what I've been explaining. It starts off and there was just ambience. It's enforcing the fact that there's this green lava sort of substance, underneath you, that there's maybe a bit of airiness, breeziness, coldness in the space. And then when we're trying to go to a very specific emotional moment, then we're transitioning into that. So I saw a question here. It was a brilliant question. Talking about kind of like how do you construct this? Is it all one track? How does that work exactly? So because we're dealing with a player that could exit at any point, they could map out. They have a lot of options that they aren't restricted from doing. This is kind of how we approach it. Let's see. Is that showing up? Is it flipped for you? It's kind of flipped for me, so I'm not sure.
No, it looks good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was great.
So along the left side, you can kind of see a little wedge, almost a doorstop. That would be kind of like we're transitioning into a loop, which in Unity, using, in this case, Fabric by Tasman Audio, which I mentioned earlier, we are telling it, okay, trigger this event, and that event says to Fabric, I guess I'm gonna play this. It's all that. It gets the timing perfect. You're not dropping beats or bars or frames or anything like that in the music. It just goes straight into the loop. At that point, we're kind of at the battle scene, level 1. It plays through the sequence. That was the whole harpsichord thing. It's really playing to that medieval trope, the harpsichord and all that kind of stuff. And then you beat the bosses or the bad guys from level 1. Now it's going to transition to level 2. And the way that it does that is through a stinger, what I've got listed off there. And that's like a brief musical moment. It's, in the case of this game, it gets to be super cheesy, which is fun, a lot of fun. It's like Weird Al Yankovic, or however it's said. Like, he gets to write music that's so tongue-in-cheek, so like meme-worthy. Like, it's just, he gets to write about subjects that no other pop artist gets to write about. That's what this game represented for me, so that was sort of the fun. So at that point, an event is triggering that's saying, hey, they've beat level 1, play this stinger, and then transition that stinger directly into the following loop. And then you see how it's, it's a simple enough sort of pattern. We repeat that for every level that we have, where it's a different loop. Musically speaking, compositionally speaking, I am thinking through, like, how is this transition going to do things like, say, introduce the electric guitar, kind of a new spin on that whole medieval thing. For whatever reason, it's not medieval at all. It's a bit of a pop trope. It works great, though, and it feels so cheeky and fun and nerdy, like it's perfect.
Yeah.
Or at least, well, now I'm just, like, stroking my own ego, but it felt great at the time.
No, that scene was awesome.
So you kind of get the concept. And at the very end of it, there was a sequence of another stinger leading into, in this case, an actual another loop that was meant to... so when the player first came into the environment, you saw at the end there was that big gate. The goal for the player was to go into a couple different areas, different rooms, and beat the boss, solve the puzzle. It unlocks part of the gate. So in this case, the player would have unlocked the second of the puzzles. The gate gets fully unlocked, at which point we play a loop that's supposed to evoke mystery, what's behind the gate, anticipation, is it scary or not scary, maybe not too much telling them what they should feel, but creating a canvas for them to feel a bit of anticipation and perhaps worry, if we wanted to push it that way. And then when they go through that gate, they actually have a big boss fight with a huge dragon, and it kind of goes from there. But when they finish the first puzzle, it would just do a stinger into nothing, and it would go back down to ambience, at which point that emotionally makes the player feel less guided, a little more like, I've done one thing, what do I do now? It makes them start to think about the game mechanics a bit. Yeah, so you see how that kind of goes. I see the chat, there's a couple things here. Separate transition, sequence, we covered that. Don't know if this is on topic. Usually find difficult to finish a piece. Oh, yes. Man, you guys have some really good questions. I appreciate this. Okay. You know what's coming next. Of course.
Gotta keep it fresh.
Keeping it fresh. Let me make sure I read through this properly. I touch on if zero music theory knowledge sounds nice. Do you have any advice for that? Okay. I feel like this will be pretty applicable for everyone. And then I'll also maybe talk a little of, okay, if you're not going to compose music, what do you do? If you're not going to become a sound designer, what do you do? I'll speak to that in a moment, but I do want to answer this question because it's really important. And actually, this question has a lot to do with any creative outlet, not just being a music composer or doing anything in that regard. Okay, so first, flagging my dirty laundry. Let me show you my skeletons in the closet. Maybe it'll be inspiring or hopeful for you. So for a whole lot of years, I wrote music that was pretty much as you described it. I have a riff, I have an idea, I have a thing, and I write, and then I never finish anything. I think that there are a couple things that are going on there. And this is strictly from my own experience, but I do think it's a very human reaction to things. One thing is what motivates you to create. Whether that's art, whether it's programming, whatever it is, what motivates you? I know for myself, when I was your guys' age, what would motivate me was how was I feeling? So I might, I'm an artist. I, might feel a little depressed, a little sad or whatever. And I feel like I'm sad. I'm going to go write some music about my sadness. But it was so cathartic, it was like a salve to my wound. It was like, well, I don't feel sad anymore, but I was 2 hours in and I hadn't finished anything and I wasn't sad anymore. How am I going to keep writing sad music? Am I going to force myself to be sad so I can finish the song? Like, how ludicrous. So all of these like emotional incomplete journals are just written into music and then that's it, and they don't get finished. So the question is, what is motivating you? Something that you can do to force motivation upon yourself is to set goals. I'm a huge believer in setting goals, setting up systems for accountability, and then going after them. What can that look like? An example for me, when I was trying to get in with Disney and start doing composition stuff, I knew that there was a big audio director guy that was coming to the Kelowna studio. And I was like, he said the last time he was here, if you have a demo reel, why don't you show it to me? And I was like, I don't have a demo reel, but I knew he was coming. So I said, well, I need a demo reel. What am I going to do? So what I did was I took little short projects, so you can iterate quickly. Little advertisements, I found that I liked them. They were visually interesting, conceptually interesting, and I stripped out all the audio and I wrote it from scratch. I was careful to not watch it too many times and get their music in my head, so I would be in a comparison trap. Instead, it was just like, watch it once, remove the audio, now I'm the composer, I'm the sound designer, I'm the voiceover actor, I'm going to go do it. And that was very motivating because I'm going to show this to someone. I want, not only do I have like a capsule of project that's small enough that it is completable without my energy being sapped, I have a goal that I'm moving towards for it. I'd encourage you, regardless of whether it's music, if it's video games you're interested in, if it's, I don't know, even just applying for something that's quite academic in nature, set goals for yourself and then work backwards with those goals. If I said to myself, I want to show this demo reel to a person that I want to impress, I have to answer the question, what would impress them? Would one little advertisement impress them, or would I want to show some range? Well, it's obvious at that point, well, I'd want to show some range. So maybe 3, a sort of tripod of sorts. Maybe it has enough stability between the 3 examples that I could show this off. Awesome. So that was a very motivating thing for me so that I could actually finish projects. Another thing that can be motivating is saying to someone, if you're kind of new at something but you're interested in it, say to someone, if you're a photographer, I'll switch out so that we're not just focusing on music, but it still applies. You're a photographer and you say to yourself, I am going to approach 10 people this week and tell them that I will do their portrait for free. Suddenly you have inbuilt motivation because you don't want to socially embarrass yourself by saying, I'm going to do this for you, and then whinging off and, flaking out and not doing it. So, that's a way for you to start building a portfolio in a way that creates built-in accountability and motivates you, kind of kicks your butt to actually get it done. Another thing to do is to tell people when you're going to do something by. It's a good practice not only to know how long things take, but by telling someone, I'm going to get you that by end of day Wednesday, and doing it because you think either it's a matter of honor, which is an old concept, or it's a matter of impressing them so that they'll believe I'm reliable, even if it's not true, you know? Yeah, I feel like that might explain it a little bit in terms of, you know, music theory, having it or not having it, how that affects your ability to finish something. That might be a factor. As an example, it's pretty easy to build, well, let me put it like this. When I would write stuff and I wouldn't finish it, it was never a 2-minute or a 3-minute song. I was kind of like a construction worker who lays a foundation for the front entryway of a house, puts up the studs, puts in the insulation and the wiring, drywalls it, paints it, does the trim and everything. That's kind of in the wrong order. I don't know. They finish off this front entrance, and then you walk through the door and you say, it's just a front entrance. There's no house. So I found for myself that I would often have this problem where, because I was in a DAW, and I see this question about what DAWs and things I would recommend. I'll get to that in a moment. It's so fun to be in a DAW, but there's something to be said for, you can see over here, I have the piano turned away from the computer, and for practical reasons, it would make more sense to have the keyboard a full length right here, right? But for creative reasons, it makes more sense for it to be over here for me, because then I turn away from all the shiny things that I can find on the computer, all the producing things that I could build a song and layer it up, but it's only the front entrance. I turn away from those things and I say to myself, you actually have to finish the arrangement first, which is to say, write 2 minutes or 3 minutes of music that is cohesive, that works, that creates the melody, the harmony, the rhythm, being the memory, the emotion, and the body impact that I'm looking for. Can I accomplish that with just a piano or just a harpsichord or just a guitar? By doing that, it's also way easier to layer up and produce the thing and orchestrate the thing if you want to do that, or make a beat, you know, figure out the arrangement, and then you can go up. But what I do find is that where music theory comes in handy is if you're saying to yourself, I have a verse or an A section to my music, what is the B section going to sound like? You do have to know what you're going to do with the notes to make it familiar but different. Make it so it seems cohesive with the story you're already telling, but different enough that it is truly a chorus or a B section or whatever. So that's what I'll say on that. Going into recommended DAWs in particular for sound design. Okay, this is a technical conversation, so I won't dwell on it very much. First and foremost, even though I'm using lights and camera dynamics and stuff like that to maybe buy some trust with you, all of this gear doesn't matter. You can do exactly what I did there on your laptop. So don't imbibe the lie that the tool is the creativity. The tool is the way that you make something cool. Now, ultimately, I have to make lots of music when I'm composing. I have to do lots of sound design. These tools are for efficiency and optimization. They are for workflow and for buying trust, earning trust with clients and stuff like that. So they are valuable to me, but at your stage, you don't think about the tools so much. But in terms of DAWs, I'll maybe do a little bit of a myth bust of sorts. If you're into the world of DAWs, you've probably heard of Pro Tools. Pro Tools is considered the industry standard for audio. In statistics, that's not actually true. In practicality, it is true. So let me explain that. Basically, all of the big movie houses have a ton of hardware, gear in their studios that are built on the Pro Tools, or Avid is the developer, their platform. So for that reason, it's the standard, because they say you're composing a thing, you're working on a thing, send it over to us in Pro Tools and we'll do your mixing, we'll do your mastering. All of those services are separate. So you have to have good sort of baton passing and Pro Tools just happened to be first in the industry to do that. Now, in practical terms, getting to the stats around like what are people using, for sound design, Reaper is becoming a huge DAW in the industry because it's way more stable. It doesn't have all of the legacy hardware support and things that Pro Tools has, and it has a lot of automation and optimization. I regrettably am currently on Pro Tools, and that's because I was taught in Pro Tools and because some of my current clients like the baton pass into Pro Tools, but I loathe it. I hate it for so many reasons. I can have Pro Tools empty in my computer and it'll spike the CPU to 100%. Empty. I'm like, that's crazy. Okay, anyways. Other things, DAWs, for music and stuff like that, music and sound design both. Ultimately, what is your goal at the beginning? It's not to integrate with some big studio. It's just to create something, and something that you enjoy and that you like. So on the one side, Reaper is a little bit more technical. If you're just trying to create something and you have GarageBand because you're on a Mac, use GarageBand. You can do that. I sometimes do sound design in Logic, which is my primary DAW for music composition, but sometimes I just like the creative palette it allows me to have, whereas Pro Tools, I have to buy all these plugins and it's expensive, and there are some good workflows there that I use, but it has its limitations. Anyways, whatever DAW you have is the DAW you should use. Get good at it. Spend a lot of time in it. My personal preference is Logic for music composition. Ableton Live is interesting for pop music production. I haven't used it myself, but that's a really interesting choice there. Pro Tools, only if you're planning on integrating with the industry in that vein. Otherwise, use Reaper for sound design stuff. Enough of that. If you don't know what a DAW is, you were just like, what was that?
For all these words, yeah, it's too much.
I also have some questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, actually, I stayed to kind of. I do have a few questions in specific.
Okay.
Have you ever published? Okay, because me personally, I make electronic music, and I just like to ask, like a few questions. But have you ever released electronic music tracks, or was it just more of a?
Yeah.
Like just more generally in sound designs.
So my vein has really been the music. This is kind of tying to the conversation around motivation and finishing things. I find it really motivating to be working for clients because I have to make commitments. I have to deliver. They also pay, which is great for my mortgage, all these things. So I haven't personally written any music under my name and released it either on Spotify, commercially, or otherwise. I've only ever done it to serve games. With that said, I've worked with musicians to produce their songs or to mix and master their songs and go from there. Probably part of what you're getting to in your question, even though you haven't asked it, is like, how do you publish music and do so successfully? Is that a fair topic switch? You can say no. Your face says no.
Something more technical.
Okay, go into the technical.
Yeah. So recently I've been trying to transition into making dubstep.
Yep.
And I find that growls are pretty hard to make. Like, what tips? Yeah, that's pretty technical, I know, but like, what tips would I'm actually using? I'm mainly using Serum, if you know what that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
To design my growls. What tips would you have?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing, it's interesting. The subject of music theory, I think that it's becoming less relevant because we have producers. We have people who are creating sounds. It's kind of like you have music theory on this side where it's really about what are the notes and chords and all that kind of thing. How do they work together? Then you have sound designers or producers on this side who are like, I've got a sound, it's FM synthesis, and it's a growl, and I'm trying to get my wub-wubs and my wap-waps in there, Like, how do I do that? That is its own sort of music theory, but it's technical. So, in fact, back in the day, audio engineers were, in fact, people in lab coats. They were scientists, in a way. They were engineers creating the devices that they worked on. They were technical in nature. So music has this unique thing where it's always moving between the emotional and the technical. So in terms of how do you get good at that kind of production, that's okay, two ways I'll answer that. One is there are a lot of tools, and Serum probably has a lot of presets by default that create some of the sounds you're looking for. But it's a question of like, how can you put your fingerprint on it? Well, if they had a patch that they just call dubstep and it has a growl or something like that, can you take that sound, bounce it, or re-record it into your DAW, and then cut it up, reverse it, stretch it out, compress it, do things to just the sound they've created, and start inventing your own song after it? Like, in that way, dubstep can be actually a lot like sound design and less like music theory and music composition. The other thing, I mean, obviously, just looking at YouTube tutorials. Maybe it's downloading some presets somebody else has made. Is there any shame in getting a sound from somewhere else? As long as it's not a copyright infringement, it doesn't matter where your sound comes from. The goal is to make, I have my low-end growl sounds, I maybe have a sub bass that's enforcing it, and then I have my high-end screechy sounds, and I have a kick and a snare that are really punchy. Like, you're creating this palette of sounds, but then you can start to get to work constructing the actual song. So yeah, my suggestion is work with the tools you have. There's probably already some stuff in there. Look for tutorials that will teach you like how do you do like FM synthesis is a common choice for dubstep. Learn how that works. Learn how to automate your sounds and warp them and transition them, or go to more of a cut and paste method and just like bounce out a sound, cut it, distort it, affect it, make it your own. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Used sounds from chainsaws, lawnmowers, and doom. Yeah, exactly. Like, there is this this example here that Ahmed has shared, is like their music can come from a whole lot of places, and it can be quite experimental, and you can get into like real life sounds become your instruments, you know? Yeah, let's see. What tools like DAWs do you use, and anything that beginners can use? There are a lot of apps. Like, if you're more of an app-oriented person, like you have an iPad, is probably an easier platform, or a tablet of some kind. There are a lot of apps out there that will help you to just start creating music. You may not be composing like on a stav or with a piano roll or anything like that. But for beginners, I mean, GarageBand is really probably one of the most accessible ones, because you take a multi-trillion-dollar company and you let them build a DAW that's supposed to be accessible to the world for creating music. That's a pretty good place to start. Other options that people find useful, if you're a beat maker, Fruity Loops is kind of a good starting point. It has a lot of technical depth if you want it, but it is actually a nice place to just start creating music. Otherwise, there are apps that will help you just make loop-based music, which is a good starting point. Another one that's near and dear to my heart is called Reason Studio, and that one, it's more of a play environment, a sandbox of sorts. It has a lot of technical depth if you want it, but it's also a very cheery design, and they're very thoughtful about what it is they create. Yeah, we've got 7 minutes left here. I'm wondering if somebody wants to guide how we land this plane, as well as how we get the most value out of the last few minutes here.
Well, we had a couple questions prepared. One of the ones I think would be probably more important would be, we were wondering where to find additional resources outside of this talk to like find more information about like beginning for things like this, or even taking it a little bit further.
Yeah, if it's all right by you, maybe I'll try and prepare some things and send them afterwards. So if Jaden or someone else could just fire me that through the email that you've got for me, do that, and I'll prepare some resources, and feel free to share them with everybody that attended here.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Like, on average, how many soundtracks does a game require? Like, what do you say?
That depends quite a bit on the scale. Oh, I realized I didn't get to someone's question here. Somebody had talked about music that's being kind of auto-generated and such. Like, for games of huge scale, they have struggled with either having massive suites of music and huge files that are hanging out on your PC or your spinning disk, whatever it is, and loading and unloading these huge files. And so with more modern AAA titles, they'll have music that is either being created through MIDI, and there are MIDI samples, and it's actually organically creating the soundtrack based on certain parameters and programmed parameters. or there are loop layers that are working together either horizontally or vertically. Well, ultimately it's both. In which case, musically, there are 5 layers that can unlock at any time and work perfectly with each other at any point in the player's gameplay, in which case they move close to an object, away from an object, close to an enemy. Now they're engaged in battle, and that music can all of a sudden be like, boom, all 5 tracks are playing. That includes the big drums, so your body, your tension, anxiety, stress, all those things start to happen. Or it can come down to a single layer that's barely noticeable and tranquil and peaceful, but it's actually all in the same piece of music. And that's a lot of music composers who work on films are actually moving into game composition because of the technical complexity, the musical complexity of creating that kind of music motivates them. They're like, that's a challenge I would like. I've nailed this linear media thing with music or advertisement or with movies or advertisement, yeah. I don't know if I answered everything there. Any other final questions? 4 minutes left. This time is yours.
I was wondering, for people who actually want to get into the field, what do you think? Like, what qualifications would you need? Like, do you need like a portfolio or anything?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, I would say demo reel is key. The thing that I would encourage you guys, and this doesn't even matter if it's video games or some other field, unless you're in a field like being a doctor where every single step is quite well outlined, ultimately people are wondering to themselves, can I trust you? Do I like you? Can you do the thing I need you to do? And can I afford you? So in terms of how do you prove that out to someone? If you, say that you want to get into music composition specifically. If you get to the end of 2020 and you don't have 5 songs to show someone in different genres of an area that you're interested in, you don't have a portfolio at all, how far ahead do you think you are compared to the person that does have those things? So you can say to yourself, how do I brand myself? How do I represent myself? How can I prove to people that I can do the thing? And to me, there's this this TED Talk that was years and years ago about the paperclip game. I don't know if you've heard of this. The idea was somebody went away and said, I have a paperclip. Does anyone want to trade me this for something else? Somebody says, that's fine. I have this interesting figurine. Why don't you trade it for that? And now he takes that second thing he's got. He's gotten rid of the paperclip. Now he says, okay, now I'm going to trade this up for something bigger and better, and so on. And eventually this guy had a house. He got a house from this. It was a long story, a long sequence of trade ups. But that's what you do. Like early on, I was doing stuff for free with friends. I was gaining experience, building a bit of a portfolio of skills. I was also figuring out, what do I like doing or not doing? From there, I traded my paperclip in for, here's this demo reel I'm going to show this guy, that's coming up from LA. And I created those ads. I didn't get paid for that. I created those fake ads as a part of my demo reel. I traded it up. I showed him. He said, that's pretty good. Okay, we'll give you an opportunity part-time to do some stuff, to prove yourself. And then I traded that up. Then it was full-time. Then I traded that up. It was an award. Then I traded that up. It was building my own business because now I have a network of people and trust and so on and so forth. So like where I am now is not where I was 10 years ago. And it was this slow paperclip trading up of things to get where I'm going. So the things that you need to decide for yourself, if you're interested in getting into games or if you're interested in getting into audio specifically, is I'd encourage you to prototype as much as possible. That is to say, if you say, I want to get in games, and I say to you, well, have you ever done a game? And you say, well, not really. Or I've done one, but it's in a very niche genre. It's like, well, okay, why don't you do 3 different types of games and find out which of them you really enjoy? And if you're doing that work for free, it's easy for you to get your foot in the door in general if you're able to talk to people and say, hey, I'll do this for free. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it. That's fine. And then when you're done the project, if they liked it, you say, can you give me a recommendation? Suddenly you've traded your paperclip in for something bigger because you're getting social proof that you can do the thing and that people cared about it and trusted you. Then the next project, you get a paycheck and a demo reel item and a recommendation. Your paperclip's getting bigger. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit long-winded long-winded as much of this has been, but thank you everybody for your patience of being here, of sharing this time with me. I hope that it's been valuable for you. You can reach me. I'm not always available to answer questions and that kind of a thing, but if you go to davidfairfield.com, you can find me there. I'm also quite active on LinkedIn, experimenting with that, prototyping to see what I can trade into in the future. And yeah, my contact information, you can find it through that. If you do reach out to me and you have questions and you're like, I want to get in the industry and like, how can I do it and whatever, at that point, because you've been getting to know me a little bit here and I'm trying to be encouraging and optimistic and even gentle, I might be a little harder on you. I might be pointing out a few things that I'm like, you're really great at this, you're awesome at this, but here's something that you're not maybe good on, or that you can work on, or something that you can do to build yourself up. And I've been told many times, like, you need a thick skin to be in the industry. I'm a very sensitive person. I don't know that you need a thick skin, but you do need to have your head about you and not get destroyed by people giving you critiques. You have to say to yourself, I'm going to get my butt kicked a little bit here, but I'm going to try and get the most out of it that I can so that I can grow and go further. And so that'll be my approach if you do reach out to me. Yeah. Oh, thank you for throwing that up there. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so that's it. We're past 7 o'clock. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. That was
Thank
awesome.
you so much.
That was really good.
Thank you.
Oh, you are most welcome. So yeah, feel free to reach out. I am friendly despite that warning. I think that comes across, but there you go.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. That was actually so interesting.
Yeah, that was
Yep.
Yeah, there
Thank
was a
you.
lot there. It was awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And who knows, maybe we'll do something like this again sometime.
For sure. Have a great evening.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.